My daughter-in-law stood in the middle of my living room with tears running down her face, while a police officer took notes beside the broken back window. "Thank God you're safe, Evelyn," she whispered as she wrapped her arms around me, holding me just a little too tightly. I didn't answer right away. I just kept staring at the open wall safe hidden behind the painting in my hallway. Empty. Every dollar my late husband and I had saved over 40 years was gone. Nearly $300,000 in cash, bonds, and emergency savings had disappeared in less than 2 hours. The drawers in my bedroom had been pulled open. Closet doors hung halfway off their hinges. A lamp lay shattered beside the couch. At first glance, it looked convincing, like someone had rushed through the house in desperation, searching for valuables. But then I noticed something strange. My jewelry box was still sitting untouched on my dresser. The silver necklace my husband bought me on our 25th anniversary was still there. So was the gold bracelet from my mother. Even the antique watch collection in the office drawer had been ignored. Whoever broke into my home had walked past thousands of dollars worth of valuables and gone straight for the safe. Straight for the exact place where my savings were hidden. Only family knew about that safe. The thought settled into my chest slowly, cold and heavy. Vanessa kept rubbing my shoulders while speaking softly to the officer, explaining how she had stopped by to check on me after I didn't answer my phone for an hour. Her voice sounded perfect. Concerned. Caring. Almost rehearsed. "She's been overwhelmed lately since losing Frank," she said gently. I was worried something might have happened. I looked at her then. Perfect blonde hair. Cream-colored sweater without a wrinkle. Diamond earrings catching the afternoon sunlight. Not a single sign that she had rushed over after discovering a burglary. And suddenly, I remembered something she'd asked me 3 nights earlier while we sat at my kitchen table drinking coffee. "Do you still keep everything in that old safe, Evelyn?" At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, standing in the middle of my destroyed living room while she pretended to comfort me, those words echoed differently in my mind. The police officer asked me if anyone besides family knew about the safe. Vanessa answered before I could speak. "No," she said quietly. "Just us." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. Because in that moment, I realized my daughter-in-law wasn't afraid for me. She was afraid of what I might figure out. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 68 years old, and until that afternoon in Fairfield, Connecticut, I believed family betrayal was something that happened to other people. The police officer walked through the house one last time before handing me a business card and telling me someone from the department would contact me within the next few days. His shoes made soft sounds against the hardwood floor as he stepped around the broken glass near the kitchen. Vanessa followed him to the front door, thanking him in that sweet, careful voice she used whenever she wanted people to trust her. I stayed in the hallway beside the empty safe. The house suddenly felt colder than it had an hour earlier. Not because the window had been broken, because something inside me had shifted. Frank used to tell me that instincts were gifts people ignored until it was too late. Standing there alone, I could almost hear his voice again. "Pay attention when something feels wrong, Evelyn." Vanessa closed the front door and slowly turned toward me. Her face softened immediately. "You should not stay here tonight," she said. "You are already stressed enough." I watched her carefully while she picked a piece of glass from the sleeve of her sweater. Small movements revealed things people try to hide. She was calm. Too calm. Most people would still be shaken after finding a relative's home destroyed. Vanessa looked organized. Focused. Prepared. "Daniel says you can stay with us as long as you need," she continued. "Maybe this is a sign you should stop living alone." There it was. Soft enough to sound caring. Sharp enough to leave a mark. Over the last year, those little comments had become more frequent. "You forgot your grocery list again, Evelyn. Maybe online. Banking is too complicated now. You should let Daniel help with your accounts." Older people get targeted all the time. At first, I thought she was trying to help. After Frank died from heart failure 18 months earlier, I knew people worried about me. I was 68. I lived alone in a large colonial house near the edge of Fairfield. My son worked long hospital shifts in New York, and Vanessa often insisted on checking in. She brought soup, organized cabinets, replaced light bulbs before I could ask. Daniel thought she was wonderful. Sometimes I tried to believe that too. But grief changes the way people see things. It clears away distractions. And once I started paying attention, I noticed how often Vanessa asked questions about money, about insurance, about the house, about Frank's retirement accounts. 3 weeks earlier, She had offered to help me organize my financial documents. 2 weeks earlier, she asked where I kept my emergency cash because banks freeze accounts sometimes. A few nights ago, she casually asked whether I had ever considered giving Daniel power of attorney just in case. At the time, I brushed it off. Standing beside my empty safe, I no longer could. Vanessa stepped closer and touched my arm gently. "You are trembling," she whispered. I looked down at my hands. They were perfectly still. That was when I realized something else. Vanessa wanted me afraid. Because frightened people stop asking questions. I told Vanessa I needed a few minutes alone before deciding whether I would stay at her house for the night. She hesitated for half a second before nodding. "Of course," she said softly. "Take your time." Then she walked into the kitchen and began wiping the counters with a paper towel, even though they were already clean. I watched her from the hallway. Some people cleaned when they were nervous. Others cleaned when they wanted to avoid eye contact. The sun had started disappearing behind the trees outside my backyard, and long shadows stretched across the floor. Frank had installed himself 20 years earlier. He used to spend entire weekends working on this house. Sanding wood, painting trim, fixing loose cabinet doors before I even noticed them. After he retired from the accounting firm, he said keeping his hands busy made him feel useful. Sometimes I still expected to hear his footsteps upstairs late at night or the sound of his coffee mug touching the kitchen counter every morning at 6:30. Grief was strange that way. It never really left. It just became quieter over time. I slowly walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The drawers had been pulled open, but nothing important was missing besides the contents of the safe. My sweaters were still folded neatly. Frank's old navy jacket still hung in the closet untouched. Whoever did this had not searched the house. They had performed it. That realization settled over me with uncomfortable clarity. My eyes drifted toward the framed photograph beside the lamp. Daniel stood between Vanessa and me at a 4th of July barbecue 3 summers earlier, smiling with one arm around each of us. Back then, Vanessa still laughed easily around me. She brought homemade pies to Thanksgiving dinner and asked Frank for gardening advice every spring. The change happened gradually after Frank died, almost so gradually that I missed it at first. Vanessa became more involved in everything. She started opening my mail by accident. She insisted on attending meetings with my financial advisor because she claimed the paperwork was confusing. Last winter, I overheard her telling Daniel that older widows often became vulnerable and isolated. The word vulnerable stayed with me, not because it was cruel, because it sounded strategic. A few days later, she offered to help me update my passwords and emergency contacts. Daniel agreed immediately. "It is safer this way, Mom," he said over dinner one night. "You should let people help you." I remember staring down at my plate, while Vanessa smiled sympathetically from across the table. It was the kind of smile that looked warm from a distance, but disappeared when you studied it too closely. In that moment, I realized something painful. They had slowly stopped treating me like the owner of my own life. They treated me like a problem waiting to happen. From downstairs, I heard Vanessa calling my name, gently, asking if I wanted tea before we left for her house. I looked around my bedroom one more time. The safe hidden behind the painting remained open and hollow like a missing tooth. Then I noticed something else. The painting itself had been rehung crookedly. Frank would never have left it like that. Neither would I. Only someone unfamiliar with the room would. That night, I agreed to stay at Daniel and Vanessa's house in Westport. Vanessa insisted it was unsafe for me to sleep alone after what had happened, and Daniel sounded genuinely worried when he called from the hospital during his evening shift. "Mom, please do not argue about this," he said. "Just stay with us for a few days until the police figure things out." I told him I understood. My overnight bag sat beside me in the back seat, while Vanessa drove quietly through the dark coastal roads. Soft jazz played from the radio, low enough to barely hear. She kept both hands carefully on the steering wheel, her wedding ring catching flashes of light each time another car passed us. "You have been through enough today," she said after several minutes of silence. "Maybe this is a chance for a fresh start." I turned slightly toward the window without answering. Outside, rows of expensive homes blurred past in the darkness. Frank and I used to drive these same roads every December looking at Christmas lights while drinking coffee from paper cups. He always complained that wealthy people overloaded their lawns with decorations. "Too much sparkle usually hides something," he liked to say. At the time, I thought he was joking. Now I wondered how many things he noticed long before I did. When we arrived, Vanessa carried my bag inside before I could reach for it myself. The house smelled faintly of vanilla candles and fresh laundry. Everything looked spotless. Pillows arranged perfectly. Kitchen counters polished. No sign that chaos had touched their lives at all. Vanessa offered me chamomile tea while I sat at the marble kitchen island under soft pendant lights. "You can take the guest room upstairs," she said. "I already changed the sheets this morning." Changed them this morning. The sentence stayed in my mind. Longer than it should have. Almost as though she already expected someone to use that room tonight. Daniel arrived home an hour later still wearing blue scrubs beneath his winter coat. The moment he saw me, his shoulders dropped with relief. He hugged me tightly and asked if I was all right. For a second, I let myself lean into that familiar feeling of being protected by my son. Then Vanessa entered the kitchen carrying tea, and the moment disappeared. The officer said there was no sign of forced entry at the front door, Daniel said while loosening his tie. "Did you maybe forget to lock something?" Vanessa looked down quickly as she stirred sugar into her cup. It happened so fast most people would not have noticed it. But I did. Daniel was not accusing me. He truly believed he was helping make sense of things. Yet somehow the conversation had already shifted away from who stole my money and toward whether I had failed to protect myself. That was how manipulation worked when done well. Quietly, gradually, like water slipping beneath a locked door. Later that night, I stood alone in the guest room brushing my hair in front of the mirror when I noticed something sitting neatly on the dresser beside the bed. A folder. Beige. Thick. My name was written across the front in Vanessa's handwriting. Evelyn Harper Financial Planning. I stared at the folder for several seconds without touching it. The guest room was quiet except for the faint hum of the heating vent near the window. Downstairs, I could hear Vanessa laughing softly at something Daniel said. It sounded normal, comfortable, like any ordinary evening in any ordinary home. But nothing about this felt ordinary anymore. Slowly, I sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled the folder closer. Inside were neatly organized documents separated by labeled tabs. Retirement planning, home transfer options, emergency medical authorization, power of attorney. My chest tightened slightly as I flipped through the pages. Some of the paperwork already had highlighted sections marked with small yellow notes in Vanessa's handwriting. This would simplify things for Daniel. Recommended for seniors living alone. Protection against financial confusion. I ran my fingers across the paper carefully. The documents were recent, printed within the last week according to the dates in the corners. That meant Vanessa had prepared this before the burglary ever happened. Before she drove me to her house. Before she wrapped her arms around me and whispered how grateful she was that I was safe. I closed the folder quietly and placed it back exactly where I found it. Then I walked toward the window and looked out across their backyard. A cold wind moved through the trees under the porch lights. Frank used to tell me that people revealed themselves most clearly when money and control entered the same room. At the time, I thought he was being cynical. Now I understood he was being careful. The next morning, I woke early after barely sleeping. Downstairs, I found Vanessa already dressed in cream-colored slacks and a fitted sweater, typing on her laptop at the kitchen counter while coffee brewed nearby. She smiled warmly the moment she saw me. "I made oatmeal," she said. "I figured you needed something comforting after yesterday." I thanked her and sat down quietly. Her phone buzzed beside the laptop. She reached for it quickly, but not before I noticed the notification banner flash across the screen. Final notice. Account overdue. The message disappeared almost immediately. Vanessa locked the phone and smiled again as though nothing had happened. Daniel came downstairs a few minutes later adjusting his cufflinks while reading emails on his tablet. He kissed Vanessa on the cheek and gave me a tired smile. "I spoke to the insurance company this morning," he said. "They might investigate whether the cash in the safe was documented properly." Vanessa sighed sympathetically beside him. "This is exactly why large amounts of cash are dangerous," she said gently. "You should let professionals manage these things." I looked down at my coffee cup without answering. Every conversation seemed to lead toward the same destination. Dependence. Transfer. Control. Daniel left for the hospital soon after, kissing my forehead before heading out the door. The moment his car disappeared from the driveway, the atmosphere inside the house changed almost invisibly. Vanessa closed her laptop slowly and folded her hands together. "Evelyn," she said softly, "there are some important decisions we should probably start discussing before things become more complicated." Then she slid the beige folder across the counter toward me again. I looked at the folder resting between us on the kitchen counter while steam curled slowly from my untouched coffee. Vanessa kept her expression soft and patient, like a nurse speaking to someone fragile. "I know this feels overwhelming," she said carefully. "But after what happened at your house, Daniel and I both think it is time to make things safer for you." Safer. That word again. Everything was always about safety now. Safe finances. Safe living arrangements. Safe decisions. Frank had once told me that people rarely announced when they were taking power away from you. They wrapped it in concern instead. I opened the folder slowly while Vanessa watched me from across the counter. Inside, several pages already had signature tabs attached to them. One document would allow Daniel temporary authority over my financial accounts in case I became unable to manage daily responsibilities. Another discussed transferring ownership of my home into a family trust managed jointly by Daniel and Vanessa. My eyes paused on a sentence near the bottom of one page. Recommended due to recent traumatic events and increased vulnerability. I almost smiled when I read it. Not because it was funny, because it was too fast, too organized, too prepared. Vanessa folded her hands together. "You do not need to decide everything today," she said softly. "But after the burglary, we should act quickly before more problems happen." I lifted my eyes toward her. "You already printed all of this before yesterday," I said quietly. Her expression barely moved. "I only wanted to help you plan ahead," she replied. "Frank would have wanted someone looking out for you." The moment she mentioned my husband's name, something inside me settled into place. Vanessa thought grief made people weak. But grief had sharpened me. It had taught me how silence worked. How people revealed themselves when they believed you were too lonely to resist them. I closed the folder carefully and nodded once. "Maybe you are right," I said in a tired voice. Relief flashed across her face so quickly she could not hide it. "Just a flicker. But enough. I knew you would understand," she said warmly. I lowered my gaze and let my shoulders sink slightly, allowing her to see exactly what she expected to see. A widow overwhelmed by loss. A frightened older woman unsure of what to do next. The performance came easier than I expected. That afternoon, while Vanessa took a phone call upstairs, I quietly walked through the kitchen toward the mudroom near the garage. Her purse rested on the bench beside the door, half open. I should have kept walking. Instead, I stopped. Inside the purse, beneath a packet of tissues and a lipstick case, sat a bank envelope folded tightly in half. A corner of paper stuck out just enough for me to see the logo of a collections agency printed across the top. Final demand notice. Past due balance, $48,000. I stared at the number for several seconds before carefully stepping away. Upstairs, I heard Vanessa laughing softly into her phone. Calm, relaxed, almost happy. And for the first time since the burglary, I stopped wondering whether she had done it. The only question left was how far she was willing to go. For the next 2 days, I let Vanessa believe her plan was working. I moved slowly through the house. I asked her to repeat things occasionally. I left my reading glasses in different rooms and pretended to forget where I placed them. Each small performance changed the way she looked at me. Her patience became less careful, less respectful, almost managerial. "You should probably avoid dealing with paperwork right now," she told me Wednesday morning while taking the financial folder from my hands before I even finished opening it. "Stress can make memory problems worse." I apologized quietly and thanked her for helping me. That seemed to satisfy her. The more uncertain I appeared, the more confident she became. Daniel noticed none of it. He left early every morning before sunrise and returned exhausted long after. Dark. One evening, while he reheated leftover pasta in the kitchen, he placed a hand gently on my shoulder and said, "Vanessa has really stepped up through all of this, Mom. I hope you know that." I looked across the room where Vanessa stood rinsing dishes beneath warm yellow lights. She smiled modestly without turning around. "Family takes care of each other," she said softly. The sentence sounded practiced, like something rehearsed in front of a mirror. Later that night, I sat awake in the guest room listening to the quiet creaks of the house settling around me. Sleep would not come. Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps moving downstairs. Careful, unhurried. I waited several seconds before opening the bedroom door silently and stepping into the hallway. A narrow line of light glowed beneath the office door downstairs. I moved carefully toward the staircase, keeping one hand against the wall for balance. Vanessa sat alone inside the office with her laptop open. From where I stood halfway down the stairs, I could see spreadsheets covering the screen. Numbers, account summaries, transfer estimates. She held her phone between her shoulder and ear while typing quickly. "I know," she whispered sharply, "but I need a little more time." Silence followed. Then her voice lowered further. "Once the house transfers, everything changes." My grip tightened slightly against the stair railing. The house. Not money. Not temporary help. The house itself. Frank and I bought that colonial home 32 years earlier after Daniel graduated middle school. We planted every maple tree in the backyard ourselves. We spent entire summers repainting shutters and rebuilding the porch swing after storms. Vanessa was not trying to rescue me from loneliness. She was trying to erase me slowly enough that nobody would question it. I stepped backward carefully before the stairs could creak beneath my feet. Back inside the guest room, I closed the door softly and sat on the edge of the bed in darkness. My heart beat slowly now. Calmly. Fear had started leaving me piece by piece. In its place came something colder. Clarity. The next morning, while Vanessa showered upstairs, I quietly called. The only person Frank ever trusted besides me when it came to financial matters. Grace Miller answered on the second ring. After I explained everything, the line stayed silent for several seconds. Then Grace spoke in the same calm voice she once used during insurance investigations years ago. "Evelyn," she said carefully, "before you sign anything, I think you and I need to take a very close look at your daughter-in-law." Grace arrived the following afternoon in a dark green raincoat with a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. At 71, she still carried herself with the sharp confidence of someone who spent decades investigating insurance fraud across Connecticut. Frank trusted her instincts more than anyone I knew. After he died, Grace checked on me every few weeks, usually bringing blueberry muffins and stories about people trying to fake flood damage claims along the shoreline. Vanessa greeted her politely at the front door, but I noticed the tension that flickered across her face the moment Grace introduced herself. "I worked investigations for 30 years, Grace said casually while removing her gloves. "Old habits make me curious about things." Vanessa smiled too quickly. "Well, the police already handled most of it," she replied. "Poor Evelyn has been through enough stress." Grace nodded slowly without responding. The two women studied each other for half a second like chess players deciding which pieces mattered most. Later, while Vanessa left to meet a friend for lunch, Grace and I sat alone at the kitchen table with cups of coffee between us. Rain tapped softly against the windows while I explained everything from the strange paperwork to the overdue debt notice I found in Vanessa's purse. Grace listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she opened her leather folder and slid several printed pages across the table toward me. "I did some checking this morning," she said calmly. The first page showed multiple liens connected to a business registered under Vanessa's name. The second listed unpaid credit card balances spread across several banks. The third made my stomach tighten. Home equity loan inquiries connected to my property. Address. "She has been trying to leverage your house for months," Grace said quietly. "But there is something else." She handed me another sheet containing a timeline printed beside security camera stills from homes near my neighborhood. My pulse slowed as I looked closer. One image showed Vanessa's SUV turning onto my street nearly 2 hours before she called police the night of the burglary. Another showed no unknown vehicles entering the neighborhood during that period. Grace tapped one polished fingernail against the paper gently. "This was not random," she said. "Whoever entered your home already knew exactly what they were looking for." The room became very still around me. Outside, rainwater rolled slowly down the glass, while the clock above the stove ticked steadily forward. Grace leaned closer across the table. "The question now is whether you want proof," she said softly, "or whether you want the truth exposed." There was a difference. Proof stayed private. Exposure changed lives. I thought about Daniel then. My son who still kissed my forehead before leaving for work. My son who trusted his wife enough to hand her every key to our family. The idea of destroying that illusion hurt more than losing the money itself. Grace seemed to understand because her voice softened slightly. "Evelyn," she said carefully, "good people can still become dangerous when greed convinces them they deserve more." At that exact moment, the front door opened downstairs earlier than expected. Vanessa's heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, followed by sudden silence. Then her voice floated calmly through the hallway. Why are there security photos of my car sitting on the kitchen table? Vanessa stood motionless near the kitchen entrance with raindrops still clinging to the shoulders of her beige coat. For a brief second, nobody spoke. The only sound in the room came from the steady ticking of the clock above the stove. Then Vanessa smiled. Not warmly. Carefully. I did not realize we were conducting an investigation, she said lightly as she set her purse on the counter. Grace leaned back in her chair without looking away from her. Old habits, she replied. Calmly. I like timelines. Vanessa's eyes shifted toward me then. Evelyn, what exactly is going on? Her voice carried just enough hurt to sound believable. A week earlier, I might have apologized immediately. I might have worried about misunderstanding her intentions. But something inside me had changed since standing in front of that empty safe. I folded my hands together and looked directly at her. Grace found security footage showing your car near my house before the burglary was reported, I said quietly. Vanessa gave a short laugh of disbelief. Of course my car was there, she answered smoothly. I told the police I drove by earlier because you were not answering your phone. Grace opened the folder again. Interesting, she said. Because according to your original statement, you said you went straight there after work. Vanessa's expression tightened almost invisibly. Just enough. She crossed her arms slowly. I do not remember every detail from a traumatic night. Grace nodded once. That is fair. But banks usually remember details very clearly. She slid another page across the table. The collections notices. The debt balances. The loan inquiries tied to my home address. Vanessa stared at the paperwork for 2 long seconds before looking back at me. You went through my private information? She asked softly. There it was again. Not denial. Deflection. Frank used to say innocent people answered accusations directly. Guilty people changed the subject. I stood slowly from my chair. Did you take the money from my safe? I asked. Vanessa looked genuinely offended. Evelyn, how could you even ask me that? But her eyes moved first toward the paperwork instead of toward me. Grace remained perfectly calm beside the table. The police will probably ask more questions once they see the financial pressure you were under, she said evenly. Especially after learning there was no unknown traffic near the property that afternoon. Vanessa's breathing changed slightly then. Faster. Sharper. She glanced toward the hallway as though calculating exits nobody else could see. You are twisting everything, she whispered. I was trying to help this family. At that exact moment, the front door opened again. Daniel stepped inside carrying his laptop bag, stopping immediately when he sensed the tension in the room. His eyes moved from Vanessa to the paperwork spread across the kitchen table. What is happening? He asked quietly. Nobody answered right away. Vanessa turned toward him first. Your mother thinks I stole from her, she said, her voice suddenly trembling. Daniel stared at her in shock before looking at me. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be standing barefoot in our old kitchen asking whether thunderstorms could break windows. I loved my son more than anything in this world, which was why